Millionaire CEO dumped a pregnant woman because she was poor. She warned him, "One day my child will return to destroy your empire." 21 years later, his world shattered when he saw her daughter rising as a business star, ready to take him down. My beautiful family, this is not just a story. It's one of the most shocking, heartbreaking, and powerful woman stories you will ever hear. Please don't skip the video. A short prayer for you. May God bless you with unstoppable success, endless joy, and the deepest desires of your heart. Don't forget to smash that like button and comment, "I am with my brother." Now let's dive into this unbelievable storm of betrayal, revenge, and power. A queen is not made by a crown, but by the moment she refuses to kneel. The October rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Hayes mansion like bullets against armor, each drop a percussion in the symphony of destruction unfolding within. Simone Rivers Hayes sat in the marble foyer, her 8 months pregnant belly straining against the silk of her maternity dress, a dress that had cost more than most people's monthly rent, purchased in happier times when her husband still pretended to love her. Above her, the sound of expensive luggage being dragged across hardwood floors echoed through their 5-bedroom fortress like the death rattles of a dying marriage. Jonathan Hayes, heir to a construction empire worth $47 million, was packing his life away from her with the methodical precision he brought to hostile corporate takeovers. "You knew this day was coming. Simone," his voice drifted down the spiral staircase, cold as winter steel. "Don't act surprised." Simone's dark fingers traced the curve of her swollen abdomen, feeling the baby kick against her ribs as if sensing the chaos surrounding them. She had indeed known. The signs had been accumulating like storm clouds for months. The late-night phone calls he took in his study, the sudden business trips that coincided with his secretary Melissa's mysterious absences, the way his mother, Patricia Hayes, had started looking at Simone like she was a stain on the family's pristine white legacy. 3 years of marriage, Simone said quietly, her voice carrying the strength that had gotten her through nursing school while waiting tables, through law school while working at legal aid clinics, through falling in love with a man who had seemed different from every other entitled rich boy she'd ever encountered. 3 years, and you're walking away because our baby doesn't fit your image. Jonathan appeared at the top of the staircase, his 6-foot frame perfectly tailored in a charcoal suit that cost more than most cars. Even in the act of abandonment, he looked like he'd stepped from the pages of Fortune magazine. His blue eyes, the same eyes their unborn daughter would inherit, held no warmth, no regret, only the calculating coldness of a businessman closing a deal. "Don't make this about race," he said, descending the stairs with his monogrammed leather suitcases. "This is about practicality, about the future of the Hayes name and fortune." But Simone knew better. She had heard his mother Beverly's whispered conversations with Jonathan's aunts at the country club. The careful words about maintaining family standards and protecting the bloodline. She had seen how the charity galas stopped inviting her, how business partners' wives suddenly became unavailable for lunch, how the family photos in Hayes Construction's corporate headquarters still displayed Jonathan's college girlfriend, blonde, blue-eyed, safely white. Practicality. Simone stood slowly, her hand braced against the Italian marble banister, her movements graceful despite her condition. At 22, she possessed the kind of beauty that stopped traffic. High cheekbones that spoke of African royalty, skin like burnished bronze, intellect that blazed behind dark eyes that missed nothing. Is it practical to throw away a wife with 2 degrees and a photographic memory? Is it practical to abandon a child who might inherit your business acumen and my analytical mind? Jonathan set his luggage down and pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Here are the divorce papers. I've been generous with the settlement. You'll get the house until it sells, 6 months of living expenses, and healthcare coverage through the birth." Simone took the papers, but didn't open them. Instead, she studied her husband's face, memorizing every line, every expression, cataloging this moment like evidence in a case she intended to win. And then? Then you move on with your life, and I move on with mine. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if protesting the cavalier dismissal of her existence. Simone placed both hands on her belly, a gesture both protective and defiant. "What about your daughter?" "My daughter?" Jonathan's laugh was bitter as black coffee. "Simone, be realistic. A mixed child doesn't exactly scream Hayes family heir, does it? The board members, the investors, the social circles we move in, they have expectations." "So do I." Simone's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more power than a shout. "I expect the man I married to have a backbone. I expect the father of my child to have honor. I expect someone who claimed to love me to fight for that love, instead of folding like a cheap suit the moment his mommy disapproves." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He hated when she was right, hated how her legal training made her arguments unassailable, hated that even in pregnancy she remained the smartest person in any room they entered together. "This isn't about love, Simone. It never was. It was about potential, about what I thought you could become within our world. But you'll never truly belong, and neither will this baby. I'm saving us all years of pretending otherwise." The rain outside intensified, and lightning illuminated the foyer like a photographer's flash, capturing the moment when Simone Rivers Hayes learned the difference between the man she had married and the man standing before her. "You're right about one thing," she said, her voice steady despite the earthquake occurring beneath her feet. "This baby and I will never belong in your world. We're going to build our own." Jonathan collected his suitcases, his movements now urgent, as if staying another moment might contaminate him with her certainty. "Simone, please, don't make this harder than it has to be. You're young, you're beautiful, you'll find someone else. Someone more suitable." Suitable. She tasted the word like poison. Someone who won't challenge your board meetings with economic forecasts they can't understand. Someone who won't correct your tax attorney when he makes computational errors. Someone who'll smile and wave and never remind you that intelligence doesn't come in only one color. He was at the door now, his hand on the crystal doorknob that had been a wedding gift from his grandmother. "I've left contact information for my attorneys. Any communication regarding the divorce should go through them." "What about the baby?" Jonathan paused, his back still turned. For a moment, Simone thought she saw his shoulders tense, thought she glimpsed a flicker of the man who had once traced her pregnant belly with gentle fingers and whispered about teaching their daughter to ride horses and read financial statements. "I'll arrange child support through the lawyers. But don't expect more than that, Simone. Don't expect me to pretend this was ever going to work." And then he was gone, the door closing behind him with the soft click of finality, leaving Simone alone in the mansion that had never truly been her home, surrounded by wedding photos that now looked like evidence of her spectacular naivety. The silence stretched around her like a vast ocean, broken only by the storm outside and the rapid beating of her own heart. She could have collapsed then, could have cried until her throat was raw and her eyes were empty. Could have called her mother in Detroit and begged to come home defeated and dependent. Instead, Simone Rivers Hayes walked to Jonathan's study and began opening his filing cabinets. If her soon-to-be ex-husband thought she had spent 3 years as his wife without learning the inner workings of Hayes Construction, he was about to receive his first education in the true depths of her intelligence. The offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, the tax shelters that skirted the edge of legality, the bribes disguised as consulting fees, the safety violations covered up with cash payments to inspectors. She'd been quietly cataloguing it all, her lawyer's mind filing away each piece of information like ammunition for a war she had hoped never to fight. Now, 8 months pregnant and abandoned, Simone began photographing every document with the digital camera Jonathan had bought her for their last anniversary. Each click of the shutter was a promise, to herself, to her unborn daughter. to the legacy they would build from the ashes of this betrayal. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Enjoy the house while you can. Don't get too comfortable. B. Beverly." His mother had wasted no time in making her position clear. Simone smiled for the first time in weeks, her reflection in the study window showing a woman transformed. The girl who had been abandoned was gone. In her place stood someone harder, someone hungrier, someone who had just learned that the most dangerous opponent is one who has nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Jonathan Hayes thought he was abandoning a desperate girl he had just awakened, a woman who would burn his empire to ash. Chapter Scene 2. The Birth of a Queen. The strongest fortresses are built by women who had nowhere left to retreat. The ice storm that descended upon Chicago turned the city into a crystal cathedral, beautiful and treacherous. Power lines snapped under the weight of frozen rain, plunging entire neighborhoods into darkness, while emergency vehicles crawled through streets that had become skating rinks. Inside Northwestern Memorial Hospital, the fluorescent lights flickered ominously as backup generators hummed their mechanical prayers against the storm. Simone Rivers Hayes gripped the hospital bed rails, her knuckles pale against the white metal as another contraction seized her body like a vice made of fire. The monitors beside her bed beeped their electronic symphonies, tracking heartbeats, hers rapid and strong, her daughter's steady as a metronome counting down to freedom. It had been exactly 1 month since Jonathan's abandonment, 1 month since she had discovered the true nature of the man she had married. The contractions had started at 3 in the morning while she sat in his former study, finalizing the paperwork to sell his collection of rare whiskey. The irony had not been lost on her, their daughter choosing to make her entrance while Simone liquidated the last vestiges of her marriage. "How are we doing, sweetheart?" Dr. Angela Foster entered the delivery room, her scrubs pristine despite having been on call for 18 hours. She was the head of obstetrics, a woman who had delivered over 3,000 babies and could read the signs of complicated births like prophecy written in vital signs. "We're magnificent," Simone replied through gritted teeth, refusing to admit weakness even as her body prepared to split in half. She had been in labor for 14 hours, her water breaking while a blizzard raged outside, and her phone remained silent as a tomb. No calls from the man whose child was fighting to be born. "Any word from your husband?" asked Diane, the delivery nurse whose kind eyes had seen too many women labor alone. She adjusted Simone's monitors with practiced efficiency, her movements gentle despite the chaos erupting throughout the hospital as the storm knocked out power grids across the city. "I don't have a husband," Simone said flatly, her voice carrying no trace of self-pity. "I have a daughter, and that's all I need." The truth was more complicated, of course. Jonathan's divorce papers sat signed on her kitchen counter, but the legal dissolution wouldn't be final for weeks. Technically, he remained her husband, and the baby crowning between her legs remained his legal daughter. But technicalities were for courtrooms and contracts. In the sacred space between a mother's thighs and her child's first breath, only truth mattered. And the truth was that Simone had called Jonathan when her contractions began, had left voicemails, explaining that his daughter was arriving, had texted updates throughout the long hours of labor. His phone had remained silent as a tomb, his absence more deafening than the storm raging outside. "I can see the head," Dr. Foster announced, her voice cutting through another contraction that made Simone's vision blur white at the edges. "She's got a full head of hair and she's beautiful. 2 more good pushes, Simone. 2 more and you'll meet your daughter." Daughter. The word struck Simone like lightning, illuminating every corner of her consciousness. Not the baby or your child. Daughter. A girl who would inherit Simone's intellect and Jonathan's business instincts, who would grow up knowing that queens were not born, but forged in the fires of necessity. The next contraction built like a tsunami, and Simone pushed with every ounce of strength she possessed, pouring 3 years of marriage betrayals and 1 month of abandonment into the effort of bringing life into the world. She thought of her grandmother, who had raised 6 children alone after her husband died in the steel mills. She thought of her mother, who had worked 3 jobs to send Simone to college. She thought of every woman who had ever been told she wasn't enough, wasn't worthy, wasn't capable of building her own empire. "She's here! She's perfect!" Dr. Foster lifted the baby, whose cry pierced the air like a war horn, announcing the arrival of a conqueror. Simone's daughter entered the world at exactly 11:47 in the evening on November 15th, during the worst ice storm in Chicago's history, while her father celebrated at a Christmas party in Aspen with his secretary and his freedom. She weighed 6 pounds and 11 ounces, measured 19 inches long, and possessed the most alert eyes Dr. Foster had ever seen in a newborn. "Look at those eyes," Diane whispered as she cleaned the baby. "It's like she's taking inventory of everything in the room." Indeed, the baby's gaze moved with unusual focus, tracking sounds and movement with a precision that defied medical expectations. When Dr. Foster spoke, the baby turned toward her voice. When the monitors beeped, those dark eyes searched for the source of the sound. When Simone spoke her first words as a mother, "Hello, my beautiful queen," the baby's attention fixed on her with an intensity that made the delivery room feel electric. "What's her name?" Diane asked, preparing the birth certificate paperwork. Simone studied her daughter's face, seeing Jonathan's bone structure softened by her own features, his potential intelligence magnified by her own determination. This child would be extraordinary. Simone could feel it in her bones, could see it in those impossibly aware eyes that seemed to comprehend far more than any newborn should. "Zuri," Simone said firmly. "Zuri Rivers." "Not Hayes," Dr. Foster asked gently. "Rivers," Simone confirmed. "She'll make her own name in this world." The paperwork was completed while Simone nursed her daughter, marveling at how naturally Zuri latched on, how those tiny fingers curled around Simone's thumb with surprising strength. Outside, the ice storm continued its assault on the city, but inside the delivery room, warmth radiated from the connection between mother and daughter like a furnace powered by pure love and fierce determination. It wasn't until the next morning that the first crisis struck. Simone sat in the maternity ward, counting out bills from her wallet, while the hospital's financial coordinator explained the situation with the apologetic tone of someone delivering a death sentence wrapped in bureaucratic language. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm afraid there's been an issue with your insurance coverage. According to our records, your policy was terminated 3 days ago due to what's listed as a pre-existing condition exclusion clause." The woman, whose nameplate read Jennifer Walsh, spread the paperwork across the bedside table like tarot cards predicting financial ruin. Each form bore Jonathan's signature, each document a carefully crafted weapon designed to destroy Simone's security at her most vulnerable moment. Pre-existing condition. Simone's voice remained steady, but her grip on Zuri tightened protectively. "I was healthy throughout my entire pregnancy. Every prenatal appointment confirmed it. According to the documentation filed by your husband's legal team, you had undisclosed mental health issues that made you a high-risk patient. The insurance company has denied coverage for the delivery and is demanding immediate payment of $47,000. Mental health issues. Simone almost laughed at the creative cruelty of it. Jonathan had weaponized her single visit to a grief counselor after her father's death, transforming her healthy processing of loss into evidence of instability. He had planned this abandonment with the precision of a military campaign, ensuring she would emerge from their marriage not just heartbroken, but financially devastated. How long do I have to pay? Typically, we require payment before discharge, but given the circumstances and the storm, we can extend that to 48 hours. 48 hours to find $47,000 while caring for a newborn and recovering from childbirth. The mathematical impossibility of it should have been crushing. Instead, Simone felt something crystallize inside her chest, a cold, brilliant fury that made her think more clearly than she had in months. "I understand," she said calmly. "I'll handle it." That afternoon, while Zuri slept in her arms, Simone began making phone calls, not to beg for help or mercy, but to liquidate assets with the strategic precision of a general burning bridges to prevent retreat. The diamond earrings Jonathan had given her for their first anniversary, sold to a jewelry buyer who made house calls to the hospital. The designer handbags she'd accumulated as a Hayes wife, consigned to a luxury resale shop whose owner was intrigued enough by Simone's story to offer premium prices. But it wasn't enough, even with every valuable item she could reach from her hospital bed converted to cash. She was still short $15,000. That's when Simone made the call that would change everything. "Hayes Construction, this is Melissa speaking." Simone smiled at hearing the voice of her replacement, the 23-year-old secretary who had stolen her husband and was about to learn the difference between winning a battle and surviving a war. "Melissa, this is Simone. I need to speak with Jonathan immediately." "Mrs. Hayes, he's in a meeting. Tell him his daughter was born yesterday and the hospital wants payment before they release us. Tell him he has 1 hour to call me back, or I start making phone calls to the IRS about those Cayman Island accounts I photographed." The line went quiet for so long, Simone wondered if Melissa had fainted. "I'll get him right away." Jonathan called back in 17 minutes. "Simone, you can't be serious about threatening me." "I'm not threatening you," Simone interrupted, her voice carrying the mathematical precision she used when solving complex equations. "I'm explaining cause and effect. You filed fraudulent insurance claims to stick me with medical bills we both know I can't pay. I have evidence of your tax evasion schemes that could send you to federal prison. We can resolve this like adults, or we can see who has better lawyers." The silence stretched between them like a tightrope over an abyss. "How much do you need?" $15,000, transferred to the hospital account within the hour. "And then this goes away." "This goes away," Simone confirmed. "But Jonathan, this is the last time I ask you for anything. The last time I acknowledge you as anything more than a sperm donor. The last time you have the power to hurt me." The money arrived 37 minutes later. As Simone signed the discharge papers, Zuri sleeping peacefully in her car seat, Dr. Foster approached with a gentle smile and a small wrapped package. "I don't usually do this," the doctor said, "but I wanted to give you something for Zuri. It's a book, Stories of Strong Women Who Changed the World. I have a feeling she's going to need inspiration for the empire she's destined to build." Simone accepted the gift with tears she refused to let fall. "How did you know?" "Honey, I've delivered thousands of babies. Some come into this world ready to follow. Others come ready to lead. Your daughter." Dr. Foster glanced at Zuri, whose eyes were open despite the late hour, tracking the conversation with impossible focus. "She's going to rule whatever kingdom she chooses to build." As Simone carried Zuri through the hospital corridors toward the exit, past the other new mothers with their supportive husbands and extended families, she felt no envy or loneliness. Instead, she felt the weight of infinite possibility. The ice storm had ended, leaving Chicago transformed into a crystalline wonderland that sparkled under the winter sun. The city looked different, cleaner, as if the storm had washed away everything unnecessary and left only what was strong enough to survive. Simone loaded Zuri into the back seat of her Honda Civic, not the luxury SUV Jonathan had driven away, but reliable transportation that belonged entirely to her. As she started the engine, her daughter made a sound that could have been interpreted as contentment, or could have been the first note of a war cry that would echo through the business world for decades to come. "Welcome to the world, Queen Zuri," Simone whispered as they drove toward their uncertain but uncompromising future. "Your empire awaits." While Jonathan celebrated Christmas with his secretary, Simone Rivers was teaching her newborn daughter that survival was just the first lesson in building an empire. Chapter 3. The Say. Forge of fire. Diamonds form under pressure that would crush weaker stones to dust. The alarm screamed at 4:30 in the morning, but Simone Rivers had been awake for an hour, reviewing financial reports by the pale light of a desk lamp, while her 6-month-old daughter slept in a bassinet beside her bed. The numbers on the pages told a story of careful survival. Rent for their 1-bedroom apartment in Pilsen, formula and diapers, health insurance premiums that devoured nearly half her income, and student loan payments that reminded her daily that education was an investment that took decades to mature. But survival wasn't enough. Not for her, not for Zuri. By 5:15, Simone was dressed in scrubs, her hair pulled back in the severe bun required by Metro General Hospital's nursing department. She moved through their small apartment with the efficiency of someone who had learned to accomplish in minutes what most people needed hours to complete. Coffee brewing, bottles prepared, diaper bag packed, and baby carrier loaded with everything Zuri would need for another 18-hour day that blended 3 different jobs into one exhausting marathon of necessity. Zuri watched it all with eyes that seemed to catalogue every movement, every decision, every moment of controlled chaos. At 6 months old, she rarely cried, not because she was unhappy, but because she appeared to understand that noise was counterproductive to their shared mission of building something better from nothing at all. "Morning, beautiful queen," Simone whispered as she lifted Zuri from the bassinet. "Ready for another day of conquering the world?" Zuri responded with what could generously be called a smile, or more accurately, the expression of someone who was mentally calculating the optimal path toward world domination. Her dark eyes, Jonathan's eyes, though Simone tried not to think about that, tracked everything with the focus of a surveillance camera recording evidence for future use. The commute to Metro General took 43 minutes on the L, during which Zuri observed the other passengers with the intensity of an anthropologist studying an unknown civilization. She seemed particularly fascinated by people talking on cell phones, her head tilting as if she were decoding the economics of each conversation. Metro General Hospital existed in a state of barely controlled chaos that made it the perfect training ground for someone learning to thrive under pressure. As a charge nurse in the emergency department, Simone managed 12 other nurses while treating everything from gunshot wounds to heart attacks to the mundane emergencies that comprised the bulk of urban medicine. "Rivers, we've got a multi-car accident coming in," called Dr. James Washington, the department head who had become both mentor and surrogate father since Simone started working there. 4 victims, 2 critical. "You ready to run the show?" "Always," Simone replied, settling Zuri into the hospital daycare that served the children of staff members who couldn't afford traditional childcare. It was a colorful room filled with toys and books, staffed by retired nurses who treated the children like grandchildren they'd never had. For the next 8 hours, Simone orchestrated medical emergencies with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony orchestra. She triaged patients, managed supplies, resolved conflicts between doctors with God complexes and nurses with practical experience, and somehow found time to pump breast milk in a supply closet that doubled as her office. During her lunch break, while other nurses complained about their teenagers or planned weekend activities, Simone studied for her MBA classes and worked on her business plan. The notebook she carried everywhere was filled with calculations, strategies, and projections for Rivers Consulting, a financial advisory firm that existed only in her imagination and in the meticulous planning that would eventually make it real. At 2 o'clock, her shift ended and her second job began. Simone changed from scrubs into a business suit in the hospital parking garage, transforming herself from medical professional to financial consultant in the time it took most people to grab a coffee. She collected Zuri from daycare, where the staff reported the same thing they said every day. That baby never stops watching and learning. It's like she's taking notes. The investment firm of Kraft and Associates occupied 3 floors of a downtown building that had seen better decades. Simone's office was actually a converted storage closet with no windows and barely enough room for a desk and 2 chairs. But it was hers, and it came with access to financial databases that would have cost her thousands of dollars to access independently. Her clients were small business owners who couldn't afford the premium firms that served Jonathan's social circle. Restaurant owners trying to expand, contractors looking to buy equipment, immigrant families planning for college educations they were determined their children would receive. Simone charged reasonable rates and delivered results that put the prestigious firms to shame. "Mrs. Rivers," said Dmitry Volkov, a Russian immigrant who owned 3 auto repair shops and wanted to open a 4th. "My accountant says your projections are impossible. He says no way I make this much profit in first year." Simone spread the financial models across her tiny desk. Zuri balanced on her hip, watching the numbers with the same intensity she brought to everything else. "Your accountant is using outdated formulas that don't account for the demographic shift in your target area. Look at this data on housing development and average vehicle age per household." She walked Dmitry through the analysis, showing him how the new residential construction in his area would create a customer base of young families with older cars. Exactly the demographic that needed reliable, affordable automotive repair. Her projections weren't optimistic, they were mathematical. "You see pattern I miss," Dmitry said, nodding with the respect of someone who recognized expertise when he encountered it. "You help me build empire, yes?" "We help each other build empires," Simone corrected. "That's how business should work." By 8 o'clock, Simone's consulting clients had gone home to their families, and her third job began. She converted her office into a tutoring center, helping high school students with advanced mathematics and college-bound adults with accounting principles. The pay was modest, but it served 2 purposes: additional income and intellectual stimulation that kept her mind sharp for the bigger game she was planning to play. "Miss Rivers," said Keisha Williams, a 17-year-old whose single mother worked 3 jobs to pay for SAT prep classes. "I don't understand how you do all this with a baby. My mom can barely handle her job at the grocery store." Simone looked up from the calculus problem they were solving. Zuri, sleeping peacefully in her lap, despite the complex mathematical discussions happening around her. "Your mother is handling more than you realize, Keisha. She's building your future one shift at a time. That takes a different kind of strength than solving equations, but it's just as important. But how do you make it look so easy?" "I don't make it look easy," Simone said simply. "I make it work. There's a difference." The tutoring sessions ended at 10 o'clock, leaving Simone alone with Zuri in the quiet building. This was when her real work began, the planning and preparation that would eventually transform Rivers Consulting from a dream scribbled in notebooks into a financial empire that would make Jonathan Hayes' construction company look like a lemonade stand. She spread her business plan across the conference table, surrounded by financial projections, market analysis, and strategic assessments that she had developed during stolen moments throughout her 18-hour workday. Zuri, now awake and alert despite the late hour, watched everything with those eerily intelligent eyes. "What do you think, little queen?" Simone asked, holding up two different logo designs for Rivers Consulting. Elegant and understated, or bold and unforgettable? Zuri reached toward the bold design, her tiny fingers grasping at the paper with surprising coordination for a 6-month-old baby. "Bold it is," Simone agreed. "We're not building a company that blends in with the crowd." The commute home on the nearly empty L train gave Simone time to review the day's accomplishments and plan tomorrow's objectives. Zuri slept against her chest, but even in sleep, her breathing seemed to sync with the rhythm of the train wheels, as if she were unconsciously learning the patterns of urban movement. Their apartment building in Pilsen was a 4-story walk-up that had been converted from a factory sometime in the previous century. The hallways smelled like cooking spices and industrial cleaner, and the walls were thin enough that Simone could hear her neighbors' television programs, arguments and celebrations. But the rent was affordable, the neighborhood was safe, and the apartment faced east, giving them morning sunlight that made everything seem possible. Inside their apartment, Simone settled into the evening routine that had become as automatic as breathing. Zuri's feeding and diaper change, the preparation of formula for the next day, the review of tomorrow's schedule, and the 30 minutes of reading financial journals that kept her current with market trends and investment strategies. But tonight was different. Tonight, Zuri didn't fall asleep after her feeding. Instead, she lay in her crib, making soft, babbling sounds that seemed almost conversational, as if she were trying to communicate something important. "What is it, beautiful queen?" Simone leaned over the crib, studying her daughter's face in the soft glow of the nightlight. Zuri's babbling became more urgent, her tiny hands reaching toward the business plan that Simone had left on the dresser. For a moment that defied all logic and medical knowledge about infant development, it seemed like Zuri was trying to point at something specific. Simone followed her daughter's gaze to the financial projections for Rivers Consulting's first year of operation. The numbers looked solid, conservative even, based on careful market research and realistic assumptions about client acquisition and revenue growth. But as she studied the projections with fresh eyes, seeing them from the perspective of someone who had just spent 18 hours solving other people's financial problems, Simone realized her estimates were too modest. The demand for intelligent, affordable financial consulting was higher than she had calculated. The potential for growth was exponentially greater than her careful projections suggested. "You're right," she whispered to Zuri, who seemed to smile in response. "We're thinking too small." By Zuri's first birthday, Simone had saved enough money to cover 6 months of basic expenses, established relationships with potential clients who were eager to work with Rivers Consulting, and developed a business plan so comprehensive that it could serve as a textbook for entrepreneurial success. The birthday party was small, just Simone, Zuri and Mrs. Liu from next door, who had become an unofficial grandmother figure despite her initial skepticism about Simone's parenting choices. But the celebration felt momentous, marking not just Zuri's first year of life, but the completion of Simone's preparation phase. 1 year old, Mrs. Liu said, watching Zuri attempt to blow out her single birthday candle. "In my country we say first birthday determines child's future. What she reaches for tells us who she becomes." They placed several objects in front of Zuri, a stethoscope representing medicine, a book representing education, a calculator representing business, and a small toy car representing Jonathan's world of construction and industry. Zuri studied the options with the serious consideration of a venture capitalist evaluating investment opportunities. Then, with deliberate precision, she reached for the calculator and the book simultaneously, holding one in each hand while completely ignoring the stethoscope and toy car. "Business and education," Simone interpreted. "She's going to be unstoppable, like her mother," Mrs. Liu observed with approval Jonathan Hayes had destroyed. Simone's safety net, he had no idea he'd just forced her to grow wings of steel. Chapter. Good to the first victory. Revenge is a dish best served by hands that built themselves an empire while waiting. The mahogany conference table at Chicago City Hall gleamed under fluorescent lights as Simone Rivers arranged her presentation materials with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a life-saving operation. Across from her sat 3 representatives from Hayes Construction, including Jonathan himself, who had arrived 15 minutes late in a display of arrogance that would have intimidated a lesser opponent. But Simone was no longer the abandoned wife he had discarded 3 years ago. At 25, she commanded Rivers Consulting with the authority of someone who had transformed 18-hour workdays into stepping stones toward empire. Her black suit was tailored perfectly, her presentation bound in leather that whispered power, her confidence radiating the kind of energy that made city officials lean forward in anticipation. 2-year-old Zuri sat beside her in a miniature chair, dressed in a navy dress that matched her mother's professional attire. To outside observers, bringing a toddler to a municipal contract meeting seemed either desperate or unprofessional. They had no way of knowing that Zuri possessed an IQ that testing centers refused to quantify, or that she had spent the previous evening reviewing architectural blueprints with the focused attention most children reserved for cartoon programs. "Gentlemen," Simone began, her voice cutting through the room like a blade through silk, "you've asked 3 firms to propose solutions for the Lincoln Park Community Center renovation project. 2 of those firms will give you standard approaches that meet basic requirements. Rivers Consulting will show you how to build something extraordinary." Jonathan's jaw tightened as he recognized the tone she used when she was about to devastate an opponent with superior preparation and relentless logic. During their marriage, that tone had been reserved for dismantling his tax attorney's mistakes or correcting his business partner's mathematical errors. Now it was aimed directly at his professional reputation. "Mrs. Rivers," interrupted Councilman David Murphy, glancing nervously between Simone and Jonathan, "while we appreciate your enthusiasm, Hayes Construction has been serving this city for over 20 years. Perhaps we should hear their presentation first, given their established track record." "Track record," Zuri said clearly, her 2-year-old voice carrying through the conference room like a perfectly timed punchline. Every head turned toward the toddler, who sat with her small hands folded, dark eyes moving between the adults with calculating intelligence that made seasoned politicians uncomfortable. "My daughter raises an excellent point," Simone said smoothly, opening her laptop to display a comprehensive analysis of Hayes Construction's previous municipal projects. "Let's examine that track record carefully." The next 30 minutes unfolded like a masterclass in strategic demolition. Simone presented evidence of cost overruns on Hayes Construction's last 4 city projects, safety violations that had been quietly settled out of court, and timeline failures that had become legendary among city planners who had learned to add 6 months to any Hayes Construction estimate. But the real devastation came when she revealed her alternative proposal. The Lincoln Park renovation, as proposed by Hayes Construction, will cost the city $4.7 million and take 14 months to complete. Simone explained, clicking through architectural renderings that made the city officials gasp with appreciation. Rivers Consulting can deliver a superior facility for $3.2 million in 10 months. With sustainable energy systems that will save the city an additional $200,000 annually in operating costs. "That's impossible," Jonathan interjected, his professional composure cracking like ice under pressure. "Those numbers are fantasy. No one can deliver that kind of value without cutting corners that will compromise safety and quality." Zuri stood on her chair, tiny hands pressed against the conference table, and fixed Jonathan with a stare that would have been intimidating from a seasoned business executive. From a 2-year-old, it was absolutely unnerving. "Bad math," she said distinctly, then sat back down, as if she had contributed her required input to the proceedings. The room fell silent, except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of Chicago traffic. Councilman Murphy cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps, Mr. Hayes, you could explain why you believe Mrs. Rivers' projections are unrealistic?" Jonathan pulled out his own presentation, but his hands shook slightly as he fumbled with documents that suddenly looked inadequate compared to Simone's comprehensive analysis. The construction industry operates on established principles. Material costs, labor rates, permitting timelines, these are fixed variables that don't change based on wishful thinking. "Fixed variables," Simone repeated, her tone suggesting she was explaining mathematics to a child. "Mr. Hayes, would you like me to walk through the itemized breakdown of how Rivers Consulting achieves these numbers? Or would you prefer to maintain your position that superior planning and innovative contracting are wishful thinking?" For the next 45 minutes, Simone systematically destroyed every argument Hayes Construction presented. She had researched their suppliers and found more cost-effective alternatives. She had identified regulatory inefficiencies that added months to standard timelines and developed relationships with permit coordinators who could expedite approvals. She had negotiated with subcontractors who were eager to work with a firm that paid on time and treated workers with respect. Most importantly, she had spent 3 years studying every aspect of her ex-husband's business, learning his strengths so she could surpass them, and cataloging his weaknesses so she could exploit them. "The City Council will vote next week," Councilman Murphy announced when the presentations concluded. "We'll contact the winning firm by Friday." As the meeting dispersed, Jonathan lingered near the conference table, studying Simone with a mixture of recognition and disbelief that made her feel like she was watching someone discover that their discarded lottery ticket had been worth millions. "Simone," he said quietly, "I didn't know you were in the construction consulting business." "There are many things you don't know about me, Jonathan," she replied, packing her materials while Zuri climbed into her lap with the easy confidence of someone who had never doubted where she belonged. "That's what happens when you abandon someone without bothering to learn who they really were. That's not... Look, can we talk privately?" Simone lifted Zuri into her arms, noting how her daughter's attention focused on Jonathan with the same analytical intensity she brought to complex mathematical problems. "We are talking. Right here, right now. Lord, what did you want to say?" "I made mistakes 3 years ago. I was young, I was pressured by my family, I wasn't ready for the responsibilities of marriage and fatherhood. But seeing you here, seeing what you've accomplished, maybe we could—" "No," Zuri said firmly, her small voice cutting through Jonathan's carefully rehearsed reconciliation speech. Simone smiled, kissing her daughter's forehead. "My business consultant has spoken. I trust her judgment completely." That evening, Simone received the call that would change everything. "Mrs. Rivers," Councilman Murphy's voice carried the satisfaction of someone delivering excellent news. "The City Council has voted unanimously to award the Lincoln Park renovation contract to Rivers Consulting. Your presentation was the most impressive we've seen in 20 years of municipal contracting." Simone set down her phone and looked at Zuri, who was sitting at the kitchen table, working through a book of mathematical puzzles designed for children 3 times her age. "We won, beautiful queen. Our first major victory." Zuri looked up from her puzzles, smiled with the serene confidence of someone who had never doubted the outcome, and returned to solving problems that would challenge most elementary school students. The next morning brought the first consequences of their victory. The Chicago Tribune's business section featured a front-page article titled, "David and Goliath, Small Consulting Firm Defeats Construction Giant for City Contract." The article included photographs of both presentations, quotes from city officials praising Rivers Consulting's innovative approach, and a sidebar analysis of Hayes Construction's recent struggles with cost overruns and timeline failures. Jonathan called 3 times. Simone deleted each voicemail without listening, but the real impact became clear when Dmitry Volkov arrived at her office with a bottle of expensive champagne and a business proposal that would triple the size of Rivers Consulting overnight. "Mrs. Rivers," he said, his Russian accent thick with excitement, "every small business owner in Chicago is talking about how you destroyed Hayes Construction. Everyone wants to work with women who can make impossible numbers become reality." By the end of the month, Rivers Consulting had signed contracts worth over $2 million in annual revenue. Simone hired her first employee, then her second, then moved to larger office space in a building that whispered success instead of desperation. At 4 years old, Zuri Rivers watched her mother defeat the man who abandoned them. She learned that power isn't inherited, it's taken. Chapter 5, The Prodigy's Rise. A genius raised by a warrior becomes an unstoppable force of calculated destruction. The conference room at Rivers Consulting buzzed with the controlled chaos of a business that had grown from kitchen table dreams into a 23-employee operation that had expanded from its initial $2 million in annual revenue to over $12 million in contracted business. Simone Rivers, now 27 and wearing the kind of power suit that made competitors wonder how they had underestimated her for so long, reviewed quarterly projections while her 4-year-old daughter sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by architectural blueprints that she studied with the intensity of a master strategist planning a campaign. "Mama," Zuri said without looking, up from the complex diagrams, "Mr. Volkov's warehouse expansion has a structural inefficiency in the southeastern corner that will cost him an extra $400,000 if we don't redesign the support beam configuration." The room fell silent. 3 senior consultants, 2 junior analysts, and 1 structural engineer stopped their discussions to stare at the preschooler who had just identified a flaw that had eluded their collective expertise for 2 weeks. "Show me," Simone said calmly, as if having construction analysis provided by someone who still needed a booster seat was the most natural thing in the world. Zuri stood, walked to the blueprint table with the confident stride of someone who had never doubted her right to command attention, and began tracing structural lines with a finger that barely spanned the width of a pencil mark. "See here," she explained, her vocabulary far exceeding that of children twice her age. "The load distribution follows this pattern, but the soil compression data shows weakness in this quadrant. If we move the main support 12 feet northwest and add secondary reinforcement here and here, we eliminate the problem and save enough steel to reduce costs by exactly $407,000. Daniel Kim, the structural engineer Rivers Consulting, contracted for complex projects, pulled out his calculator and spent 10 minutes verifying Zuri's assessment. When he looked up, his expression mixed professional admiration with the kind of bewilderment reserved for witnessing the impossible. "She's correct," he announced. "Not just correct, brilliant. That solution is better than anything I've seen in 15 years of commercial construction." Simone felt a familiar surge of pride mixed with protective instinct. Zuri's intellectual gifts were becoming impossible to hide, and she knew that extraordinary children attracted both opportunities and dangers in equal measure. That afternoon brought a call that would test every strategic skill Simone had developed during her years of building empire from necessity. "Mrs. Rivers," said the voice on the phone, crisp with bureaucratic authority, "this is Linda Walsh from the Department of Children and Family Services. We've received a complaint regarding your daughter's welfare and need to schedule an immediate home visit." Simone's blood turned to ice water, but her voice remained steady as Arctic wind. "What specific complaint?" "Anonymous reports suggest you're exploiting your child for business purposes. denying her normal childhood experiences, and possibly causing psychological harm through excessive academic pressure. Anonymous reports. Simone didn't need to guess the source. Jonathan Hayes had finally realized that his abandoned daughter was becoming a business asset worth millions, and he was moving to eliminate her competitive advantage through legal manipulation. "I'll be happy to accommodate your investigation," Simone replied with the calm confidence of someone whose records were immaculate and whose conscience was clear. When would be convenient? 3 days later, Linda Walsh arrived at the Rivers apartment with a clipboard full of questions, a camera for documentation, and the skeptical expression of someone who had seen too many cases of parental exploitation disguised as educational opportunity. She found Zuri in the living room, working on a jigsaw puzzle depicting the molecular structure of DNA while humming Mozart's Piano Sonata in C major. The 4-year-old looked up when the social worker entered, smiled politely, and returned to her puzzle without apparent stress or anxiety. "Hello, Zuri," Linda said, settling into a chair across from the child. "I'm Linda. I wanted to talk to you about your life here with your mama." "Hello, Miss Linda," Zuri replied, her diction precise and her manner completely relaxed. "Are you here because someone told you I'm unhappy?" The directness of the question caught Linda off guard. "Well, some people are concerned that you might be working too hard for someone your age." Zuri considered this with the seriousness of a philosopher contemplating existence. "Miss Linda, do you know what working too hard means? Why don't you tell me what you think it means?" "Working too hard means doing things you don't want to do because someone makes you do them," Zuri explained, selecting another puzzle piece with surgical precision. "I do mathematics because numbers are beautiful. I read construction blueprints because buildings are like 3-dimensional puzzles. I go to Mama's office because I learn more there than anywhere else. Nobody makes me do these things. I choose them." Linda spent the next hour asking questions designed to detect signs of abuse, exploitation, or psychological damage. Instead, she found a child who demonstrated emotional stability, intellectual curiosity, and a vocabulary that made her own seem limited. The real test came when Linda requested to observe Zuri's daily routine. "Zuri," Simone said the next morning, "Miss Linda wants to see what we normally do. Should we show her?" "Yes," Zuri agreed enthusiastically, "but she might get tired. A normal day is quite busy." Linda Walsh had investigated hundreds of child welfare cases. She had seen exploitation, neglect, and abuse in forms that haunted her dreams. What she witnessed in the Rivers household was something entirely different, a partnership between mother and daughter built on mutual respect, intellectual challenge, and unconditional love. She watched Zuri solve mathematical problems that challenged graduate students, then immediately switched to playing with dolls and building blocks like any other 4-year-old. She observed Simone explaining complex business concepts in language Zuri could understand, then reading bedtime stories with voices that made her daughter giggle with delight. Most importantly, she saw the way they looked at each other, not as exploiter and victim, but as two people who recognized each other as extraordinary and were committed to nurturing that extraordinariness together. "Mrs. Rivers," Linda said at the end of her investigation, "I've never encountered a case like this. Your daughter is remarkably gifted, but more importantly, she's remarkably happy. Whatever you're doing it right." The report Linda filed would protect Zuri from future harassment, but it also attracted attention from unexpected sources. Dr. Helen Morrison from the University of Chicago's Child Development Center called the following week. "Mrs. Rivers, we rarely make unsolicited contact, but Zuri's test scores have reached our attention. We'd like to invite her to participate in our Gifted Children's Research Program. What would that involve? Comprehensive cognitive assessments, social development monitoring, and access to educational resources designed for exceptionally gifted children. We're particularly interested in her spatial reasoning abilities and mathematical intuition. Simone scheduled the appointment, knowing that official documentation of Zuri's abilities would serve as both protection and opportunity. The testing session lasted 6 hours and required 3 different psychologists to complete. When Dr. Morrison called with results, her voice carried the excitement of a scientist who had discovered a new species. Mrs. Rivers. Zuri's IQ measures above 180, which places her in the top 0.01% of all children. Her spatial reasoning skills are literally off our charts, and her mathematical abilities are equivalent to those of a college sophomore. What does that mean for her future? It means she can accomplish anything she chooses to accomplish. The question is whether the world is ready for what she's capable of creating. At 6 years old, Zuri Rivers commanded boardrooms full of grown men who had underestimated both her brilliance and her mother's training. Chapter 6. The Legal War. The most dangerous enemy is one who learned to fight in courtrooms, not just boardrooms. The process server arrived at Rivers Consulting at exactly 9:15 on a Tuesday morning, interrupting Simone's strategy meeting with pharmaceutical executives who wanted her firm to design a new research facility. 6-year-old Zuri sat in the corner, ostensibly working on advanced calculus problems, but actually listening to every word of the business discussion with the focused attention she brought to everything that might teach her something new about building empires. Simone Rivers. The server held out an envelope thick with legal documents. "You've been served." Simone accepted the papers with the same calm she brought to hostile takeover negotiations, but her hands trembled slightly as she read the heading: Hayes versus Rivers, Petition for Emergency Custody and Child Welfare Protection. The pharmaceutical executives excused themselves diplomatically, sensing that whatever was unfolding required privacy. Zuri looked up from her mathematics, her dark eyes moving from her mother's face to the legal documents with calculating intelligence. "What does it say, Mama?" Simone read through Jonathan's petition with growing fury that she refused to let show in her voice or posture. He was claiming she was an unfit mother who exploited Zuri for business purposes, denied her normal childhood experiences, and caused psychological damage through excessive academic pressure. He wanted immediate custody and was requesting a psychological evaluation to prove Zuri needed stability and normal paternal influence. "It says you're biological. Father has decided he wants to be part of your life," Simone replied carefully. "The man who abandoned us when I was born?" Zuri's voice carried no emotion, only the precise clarity of someone stating mathematical facts. What changed his mind? Simone looked at her daughter, brilliant, beautiful, worth an estimated $50 million in intellectual property if her technology concepts were properly developed, and knew exactly what had changed Jonathan's mind. "He's realized you're valuable." Zuri said, with the understanding of someone who had always known this day would come. "So, we fight." The legal battle that followed would test every strategic skill Simone had developed during 7 years of building empire from nothing. Jonathan's attorneys were from Caldwell, Sterling and Associates, the most prestigious family law firm in Chicago, known for their ability to destroy opposing parties through character assassination and procedural warfare. Simone hired Rebecca Torres from Torres Family Law, a brilliant attorney who had built her reputation defending women against wealthy ex-husbands who used custody battles as weapons of financial and emotional warfare. "Simone," Rebecca said during their first strategy meeting, "Jonathan Hayes has unlimited resources and social connections that extend to the judicial system. This won't be a fair fight. Fair fights are for people who haven't spent years planning for war," Simone replied. "What's their strategy?" "They're going to paint you as an obsessive stage mother who's exploiting Zuri's intelligence for your own financial gain. They'll claim she's under constant pressure, has no normal childhood experiences, and needs the stability of a traditional two-parent home. But Jonathan's legal team proved more ruthless than either woman anticipated. The first devastating blow came in the form of newspaper headlines that appeared 3 days after the custody filing. Child prodigy or exploited genius. Local mother accused of using daughter's gifts for business profit. The Chicago Sun-Times article featured photographs of Zuri at business meetings, quotes from unnamed sources claiming she was overworked and stressed, and expert opinions about the psychological dangers of pushing gifted children beyond normal. Developmental boundaries. Simone's business. Phone began ringing immediately. Clients cancelled contracts, potential projects were put on hold, and employees started updating their resumes as Rivers Consulting's reputation crumbled under media scrutiny. 6 major clients cancelled contracts within the first week. Rivers Consulting's projected annual revenue dropped from $12 million to $4 million overnight. But the most painful attack came from an unexpected source. Dr. Helen Morrison from the University of Chicago, who had praised Zuri's intellectual gifts just months earlier, was quoted in the Tribune as saying, "While Zuri Rivers is undoubtedly gifted, there are concerning signs that her natural development may be compromised by excessive focus on adult responsibilities and business activities." The custody hearing was scheduled for October, giving Jonathan's legal team months to systematically destroy everything Simone had built. They filed motions questioning her parenting decisions, demanded access to Zuri's medical and educational records, and requested psychological evaluations from experts who specialized in identifying parental exploitation. Rebecca Torres fought every motion with brilliant legal strategy, but the procedural warfare was designed to exhaust Simone's financial resources and emotional stamina. "They're trying to force you into bankruptcy," Rebecca explained during one of their weekly strategy sessions. "If you can't afford to continue the fight, they win by default. How much will it cost to see this through?" Conservatively, $200,000 in legal fees, expert witnesses, and court costs, Simone calculated quickly. She had approximately $150,000 in savings and assets she could liquidate. She would need to mortgage her business and personal assets to fund a legal battle that could destroy everything she had built. "Do it," she said without hesitation. The psychological evaluation phase nearly broke her resolve. Dr. James Phillips, the court-appointed child psychologist, spent 6 hours with Zuri across multiple sessions, administering tests designed to detect signs of parental pressure, emotional manipulation, and developmental delays caused by inappropriate academic acceleration. When his report was filed with the court, it contained language that made Simone's blood run cold. Subject displays signs of anxiety related to performance expectations and appears to have been conditioned to prioritize intellectual achievement over normal childhood development. Recommendation for supervised visitation with biological father, while primary custody transitions to more stable parental environment. The night before the custody hearing, Simone found Zuri in her bedroom, surrounded by legal documents she had somehow obtained from Rebecca's briefcase. Her daughter had created a detailed timeline on construction paper, mapping out every attempt Jonathan had made to contact them over the years, which amounted to exactly 0 genuine efforts. "Mama," Zuri said without looking up from the papers, "I understand what's happening tomorrow. He's going to claim he stayed away because he thought it was better for us. But I've read the custody petition, the psychological evaluations he requested, and the media strategy his PR firm filed with the court." Simone's breath caught. "How did you—" "Rebecca left her briefcase open during your last meeting. I memorized everything." Zuri set down the documents and looked directly at her mother with eyes that held intelligence far beyond her 8 years. "I want to talk to the judge. Sweetheart, the court doesn't usually allow children to testify in custody cases." Then we request special circumstances. I want to tell Judge Williams exactly what I think about the man who abandoned us trying to claim custody because I'm worth money." She paused, organizing her thoughts with mathematical precision. "I've been preparing for this conversation my entire life. Mama, every time someone asked where my father was, every time I watched other kids get picked up by their dads, every time I succeeded at something and wondered if he would have been proud. I'm ready." Simone watched her daughter practice her testimony, refining each word, anticipating counter-arguments, preparing rebuttals with the strategic thinking of a seasoned litigator. This wasn't just a child speaking her truth. This was a chess master positioning for checkmate. The next morning, Rebecca filed an emergency motion requesting that Zuri be allowed to address the court in chambers. Judge Williams, a 60-year-old woman who had presided over family court for 15 years, granted the unusual request. "Your Honor," Rebecca began, "my client's daughter has prepared a statement she would like to read to the court." Zuri stood on a wooden step stool so she could be seen over the judge's bench, wearing a navy blue dress and carrying a folded piece of paper that contained words that would end the legal war decisively. "Judge Williams," she began, her 8-year-old voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never doubted her own worth. "My biological father abandoned my mother when she was pregnant with me. He has never called, visited, or acknowledged my existence until he learned I might be valuable. My mother worked 3 jobs to support us, built a business that employs 47 people, and taught me that intelligence is a gift that should be used to help others. She never abandoned me. She built us a kingdom. I choose my queen." The courtroom fell silent as Zuri continued, her words cutting through years of legal maneuvering with the clarity of absolute truth. "Your Honor, I have documentation showing that Mr. Hayes hired private investigators to track our success starting when I was 6 years old. I have emails between his attorneys and publicity firms discussing strategies to rehabilitate his image through reconnection with his accomplished daughter. I have financial projections, his business team created estimating my potential value to Hayes Constructions, reputation and stock price." She reached into her small briefcase and produced a folder of documents that made the court stenographers' fingers pause over her keyboard. "Most importantly, Your Honor, I have this." She held up a handwritten letter, her 8-year-old script careful and deliberate. "I wrote this last night, listing every birthday, every Christmas, every school achievement, every moment when I needed a father and he chose not to be there. 47 separate occasions over 8 years when Jonathan Hayes could have shown interest in his daughter's life and chose not to." Judge Williams leaned forward, studying the child before her with growing amazement. "You kept track of all those occasions?" "Yes, Your Honor, because I wanted to make sure that when this day came, and I always knew it would come, I could prove with mathematical certainty that his interest in me is purely financial, not paternal." Judge Williams removed her glasses and studied the child who had just delivered the most articulate custody preference she had encountered in decades of family law. "Mr. Hayes," she said, turning to Jonathan, "do you have any response to your daughter's statement?" Jonathan stood slowly, his face pale with the recognition that he had just suffered a defeat more complete than any business loss he had ever experienced. "No, Your Honor, no response." Then this court awards primary custody to Simone Rivers with no visitation rights for the biological father. Case dismissed. The judge's gavel fell like thunder. Jonathan Hayes had just learned that some bonds cannot be broken by lawyers, money, or time. Chapter 7. Breaking Glass Ceilings. When they build walls to keep you out, you don't knock politely, you build your own door. The conference room at Westfield Industries gleamed with the kind of understated luxury that whispered old money and older prejudices. Simone Rivers sat at one end of the mahogany table, her presentation materials arranged with military precision, while 7 white men in identical navy suits studied her proposal with expressions that ranged from skeptical to openly dismissive. At 31, Simone commanded Rivers Consulting with the authority of someone who had rebuilt her business empire from the ashes of a legal war that had nearly destroyed her. The custody battle victory had cost her half her clients and most of her savings, but it had also freed her from any remaining illusions about the nature of the game she was playing. 8-year-old Zuri sat beside her, no longer the curious toddler who had attended business meetings as an observer. Now she was Simone's unofficial business consultant, her mathematical genius having saved 3 major projects from costly errors in the past 6 months alone. "Gentlemen," Simone began, her voice carrying the controlled power of someone who had learned to command rooms full of people who didn't want to listen to her. "Rivers Consulting has prepared a comprehensive analysis of your supply chain inefficiencies, along with solutions that will save Westfield Industries approximately $8 million annually." The presentation that followed was flawless. Simone had spent months researching Westfield's operations, identifying redundancies and waste that their own executives had overlooked, developing strategies that would revolutionize their manufacturing processes while cutting costs by 30%. But she could see in their faces that excellence wasn't enough. "Mrs. Rivers," said William Westfield Jr., the company's CEO whose grandfather had built the business with railroad money and racial exclusion policies, "while your analysis is thorough, we have concerns about whether your firm has the cultural understanding necessary to work with our traditional client base." "Cultural understanding," Simone repeated, her tone carefully neutral despite the fury building in her chest. "Our clients expect a certain aesthetic when they visit our facilities, a certain type of consulting firm that reflects our company values." Zuri looked up from the advanced statistics textbook she had been reading during the presentation, her dark eyes moving from Westfield to his board members with the focused attention of a scientist studying an interesting species of bacteria. "Mr. Westfield," Simone said with dangerous calm, "could you clarify what aesthetic and values you're referring to?" The silence stretched like a tightrope over an abyss. Westfield glanced at his board members, seeking support for what he was about to say. "Look, Mrs. Rivers, you're obviously intelligent, but Westfield Industries has been family-owned for 3 generations. We work with consulting firms that understand our heritage, firms that share our traditional approach to business relationships." "Traditional," Zuri said clearly, her 8-year-old voice cutting through the corporate euphemisms like a blade through silk. Every head turned toward the child who had just summarized their entire conversation in a single word that made grown men shift uncomfortably in Italian leather chairs. "My daughter raises an excellent point," Simone said, beginning to pack her presentation materials with movements that appeared casual, but carried the precision of someone preparing weapons. "Traditional approaches have led to the supply chain problems that are costing you millions annually. Perhaps it's time to consider whether your traditional values are more important than your traditional profits." They left Westfield Industries with their dignity intact and their business plan rejected. But Simone had recorded the entire meeting on her phone, knowing that battles were not always won in the room where they were fought. The discrimination lawsuit that followed became a landmark case in corporate civil rights law. Torres Family Law, representing Rivers Consulting, presented evidence of systematic exclusion based on race and gender, including recorded conversations that demonstrated deliberate discrimination disguised as business decisions. Westfield Industries' legal team tried every strategy from denial to character assassination. But they were fighting against documented evidence and a legal system that had finally begun to take corporate discrimination seriously. The settlement reached 8 months later, awarded Rivers Consulting $15 million in damages and required Westfield Industries to implement comprehensive diversity training for all executives and board members. But the real victory came from the precedent it established. Within weeks of the settlement announcement, Simone's phone began ringing with calls from companies that wanted to avoid becoming the next Westfield Industries. Executives who had previously dismissed her firm suddenly discovered urgent needs for consulting services that only Rivers Consulting could provide. Meanwhile, Zuri faced her own battles with systemic barriers that sought to limit her potential. Hawthorne Academy, the elite private school where Simone had enrolled her daughter, represented everything that old money and older prejudices could create. The student body was 97% white, 99% wealthy, and 100% convinced that intellectual superiority was determined by bloodline rather than ability. At 8 years old, Zuri was completing coursework designed for high school students, while facing daily reminders that brilliance meant nothing if it came wrapped in the wrong skin color. "Mrs. Rivers," said Headmaster Phillips during a parent conference, "while Zuri is undoubtedly gifted, we're concerned that she's not integrating well with her peer group. Perhaps a school with more diversity would be a better fit for her social development." "Are you suggesting that academic excellence is less important than social conformity?" Simone asked. "I'm suggesting that Zuri might be happier somewhere more appropriate for her background." That evening, Simone found her daughter in the kitchen, working on a presentation that would change everything. "What are you preparing?" Simone asked, studying the slides that covered topics ranging from educational equity to cognitive development theory. "Tomorrow is the school board meeting about next year's curriculum," Zuri explained with the focused intensity she brought to every project. "I'm going to explain why diversity makes education better for everyone, not just the students who don't look like the founders' portraits." The presentation Zuri delivered the next evening would be remembered as one of the most articulate arguments for educational inclusion ever made by someone who still lost teeth to the tooth fairy. "Board members," 8-year-old Zuri began, standing behind a podium that required a step stool for her to be seen. "Hawthorne Academy teaches us that excellence is our tradition. But excellence cannot be traditional if it excludes the most excellent minds simply because they don't match expected appearances." For 20 minutes, she systematically dismantled every argument for educational exclusivity with data, logic, and moral clarity that left the board speechless. She cited studies on cognitive diversity, presented statistical analysis of academic performance correlated with inclusive environments, and concluded with a challenge that would define her approach to barrier breaking for decades to come. "You can teach us that different means inferior, or you can learn that different means innovative. Your choice will determine whether Hawthorne Academy produces leaders or followers." The video of her presentation, posted online by a board member's daughter, went viral within 48 hours. Educational experts shared it as an example of gifted child advocacy. Civil rights organizations used it to demonstrate the importance of inclusive education. Harvard University's admissions office sent a recruitment letter addressed to future Harvard student Zuri Rivers. While competitors whispered that Simone Rivers had gotten lucky, she was busy proving that excellence speaks louder than prejudice. Chapter 8. The next generation. The daughter of a revolution becomes the architect of evolution. The Glass Conference room at Rivers Consulting buzzed with an energy that made seasoned venture capitalists check their phones to ensure they were in the right meeting. Around the table sat executives from Microsoft, Google, and Apple, all competing for the attention of a 12-year-old who commanded their respect in ways that MBA graduates twice her age could never achieve. Zuri Rivers stood at the head of the table, her presentation remote steady in her small hand, delivering a pitch that would reshape how the technology industry thought about accessibility and innovation. At 12, she possessed her mother's strategic brilliance magnified by a mathematical intuition that made complex algorithms seem like simple arithmetic. Zuritech's accessibility platform doesn't just help people with disabilities use technology, she explained, clicking through slides that demonstrated revolutionary interface designs. It makes technology more intuitive for everyone. When we design for different kinds of minds, we create better solutions for all minds. The executives took notes with the focused attention of people who recognized they were witnessing the birth of something extraordinary. Zuritech, the company Zuri had founded at 11 with a $5,000 loan from her mother, now generated $2 million in annual revenue and held patents on 17 different accessibility innovations. Simone Rivers, now 35 and commanding a consulting empire that employed over 200 people across 8 cities, watched her daughter negotiate with corporate giants with the same pride and protective instinct she had felt during Zuri's first steps. The difference was that these steps were reshaping entire industries. "Miss Rivers," said Jennifer Walsh from Microsoft's Accessibility Division, "we'd like to discuss acquisition possibilities. Microsoft is prepared to offer $50 million for Zuritech, plus a 10-year consulting contract that would make you our youngest executive vice president in company history." 67 million, countered David Kim from Google, plus stock options and complete creative control over our Accessibility Development Division. Zuri listened to each offer with the calm attention of someone who had learned negotiation, tactics by observing her mother dismantle corporate empires with spreadsheets and superior strategy. When the bidding war ended, she had received offers totaling over $150 million from companies desperate to acquire not just her technology, but her mind. "Gentlemen," Zuri said with the professional courtesy that made grown executives forget they were being rejected by someone who still needed a learner's permit to drive, "I appreciate your interest, but Zuritech isn't for sale. We're building something more valuable than money. We're building change." The meeting ended with handshakes, business cards, and the kind of respectful disappointment that came from being outmaneuvered by superior intelligence. As the executives filed out, discussing backup strategies and licensing agreements, mother and daughter sat alone in the conference room that had become their shared kingdom. "Proud of you, beautiful queen," Simone said, reviewing the contract offers that Zuri had declined without hesitation. "They don't understand yet," Zuri replied, already focused on her next presentation. "They think they can buy innovation. But innovation comes from necessity, not acquisition." The success of Zuritech brought attention that transformed their lives in ways both empowering and invasive. Technology magazines featured Zuri on their covers. Business schools invited her to speak about entrepreneurship and accessibility design. Harvard University sent quarterly letters reminding her that admission was guaranteed whenever she felt ready for college-level coursework. But success also attracted predators. The first attempt at manipulation came through Thomas Butler, a venture capitalist who specialized in representing the interests of young entrepreneurs who needed experienced guidance to navigate complex business negotiations. "Mrs. Rivers," Butler explained during a lunch meeting at Chicago's most expensive restaurant, "Zuri is obviously brilliant, but the technology industry can be challenging for someone her age. My firm specializes in providing strategic support that protects young innovators from making costly mistakes." "What kind of mistakes?" Simone asked, already calculating the angles Butler was working. "Licensing agreements, partnership contracts, intellectual property protections, the kind of complex legal structures that require decades of experience to navigate properly." Simone smiled with the expression that made opposing attorneys update their malpractice insurance. "Mr. Butler, Zuri has been reviewing corporate contracts since she was 4 years old. She's corrected errors made by law firms that charge more per hour than most people earn per month. What exactly do you think she needs protection from? Well, perhaps not protection, but representation. Someone who can speak for her interests when dealing with more traditional corporate executives. Someone who looks more acceptable to traditional corporate executives. Zuri translated from across the table, her 12-year-old voice cutting through Butler's euphemisms with surgical precision. Butler's face reddened slightly. I wouldn't put it that way. I would, Zuri continued matter-of-factly. You think corporate executives will be more comfortable negotiating with a white man than with a black girl, so you want to insert yourself between my intelligence and their prejudice. That's not representation, that's exploitation. They left the restaurant, with Butler still trying to explain why his assessment was misunderstood and their business model intact. But the real test of their resilience came when the media attention turned hostile. The Chicago Tribune's business section ran a feature story titled Child Prodigy or Exploited Genius that questioned whether Zuri's success was genuine innovation or carefully orchestrated publicity designed to enrich her mother. Within days, the story was picked up by national news networks. Television reporters appeared at their apartment building, their office, and Zuri's school, demanding interviews and searching for signs of exploitation that would confirm their narrative of maternal manipulation. The interview that would end the media harassment came when Sandra Williams from 60 Minutes requested a sit-down conversation with Zuri about her company, her childhood, and her future plans. Zuri, Williams began with the patronizing tone that investigative journalists used when interviewing children. Some people are worried that you're missing out on normal kid activities, like playing with friends and going to birthday parties. Do you ever wish you could just be a regular little girl? Zuri considered the question with the serious attention she brought to all inquiries about her life choices. Ms. Williams, when you were 12, what did you want to be when you grew up? I wanted to be a journalist. Did you read newspapers and practice writing stories? Yes, of course. Did people tell you that you should stop reading and practicing because you were missing out on normal activities? Williams shifted uncomfortably. That's different. It's exactly the same, Zuri continued with relentless logic. I want to build technology that helps people, so I study computer science, develop applications, and run a company that employs 14 people who are helping to change the world. If that's not normal for most 12-year-olds, maybe the problem isn't with me. The segment that aired 3 weeks later portrayed Zuri as a brilliant, articulate young woman who had found her passion early and pursued it with the full support of a mother who understood that exceptional children required exceptional opportunities. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. Dr. Helen Morrison, the child development expert who had praised Zuri years earlier before being pressured to recant her support, published a research paper titled Cognitive Excellence and Optimal Development in Gifted Children. The paper used Zuri's development as a case study, demonstrating that intellectually gifted children thrived when given appropriate challenges and suffered when forced into artificially limiting environments. Meanwhile, Zuritech continued growing at a pace that made industry analysts revise their projections monthly. The company's accessibility innovations were licensed to major technology firms, generating revenue that transformed Zuri from a curious child into a serious player in the global technology marketplace. The approach came through Marcus Webb, a business development consultant who claimed to represent interested parties who wanted to discuss partnership opportunities with Zuritech. Miss Rivers, Webb explained during what appeared to be a routine business meeting, my clients are impressed by your accessibility innovations and would like to explore licensing agreements that could expand your market reach exponentially. Who are your clients? Zuri asked with the direct questioning that made adults uncomfortable. Hayes Technology Solutions, Webb replied. They specialize in integrating innovative technologies into established business frameworks. Zuri's expression didn't change, but her mind raced through connections and implications that adults would have needed hours to process. Hayes Technology Solutions was a subsidiary of Hayes Construction, which was owned by Jonathan Hayes, which meant her biological father was trying to buy access to her innovations through intermediaries. "I'll need to review their proposal with my legal team," she said neutrally, giving no indication that she had just unraveled a strategy designed to reconnect him to the daughter he had abandoned. That evening, Zuri researched Hayes Technology Solutions with the thoroughness of a corporate intelligence analyst. What she discovered was a company created specifically to acquire her technology, funded by Jonathan Hayes's personal investment, and designed to give him legitimate business reasons to establish contact with the daughter whose innovations were worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She never mentioned the discovery to her mother. At 12, Zuri Rivers commanded boardrooms full of grown men who had underestimated both her brilliance and her mother's. Draining. Chapter 9. The Revelation. Truth is a weapon that cuts deepest when wielded by those who lived through lies. The call came at 6:30 in the morning, interrupting Simone's review of quarterly projections, while 14-year-old Zuri prepared for another day of running a technology company that now employed 47 people and held patents worth an estimated $200 million. "Mrs. Rivers," said the voice on the phone, professional but urgent. "This is Catherine Walsh from the Wall Street Journal. We're running a story tomorrow about the connection between your daughter and Jonathan Hayes. Would you like to comment?" Simone's blood turned to ice water, but her voice remained steady as Arctic wind. "What connection?" "Our investigation has revealed that Zuri Rivers is the biological daughter of Hayes Construction CEO, Jonathan Hayes, who abandoned his pregnant wife in 2004 and has had no contact with his child for 14 years. We're exploring the implications for both their business empires." The phone call that Simone had been preparing for since Zuri's birth had finally arrived. She had always known this day would come, had planned for it, had taught her daughter to be ready for the moment when their private tragedy became public spectacle. "I have no comment," Simone said calmly. "If you want a statement from my daughter, you'll need to speak with her directly. Is she available?" Simone looked across their kitchen at Zuri, who was listening to the conversation while working through advanced calculus problems that would challenge university professors. Her daughter's dark eyes, Jonathan's eyes, met hers with the calculating intelligence that had made her the youngest tech entrepreneur in American history. "She'll call you back," Simone said, and hung up. The next 24 hours unfolded like a controlled explosion that reshaped the landscape of American business journalism. The Wall Street Journal's front-page story ran under the headline, "Tech Prodigy Revealed as Abandoned Daughter of Construction Mogul," with photographs of both Zuri and Jonathan that made their genetic connection undeniable. The article detailed Jonathan's abandonment of his pregnant wife, his complete absence from Zuri's life, and the remarkable success both mother and daughter had achieved without his support or acknowledgement. But the real devastation came from the financial analysis that accompanied the human interest story. While Jonathan Hayes built a construction empire worth approximately $87 million, the article explained, the daughter he abandoned has created technology innovations valued at over $200 million. Zuritech's accessibility patents alone generate more annual revenue than Hayes Construction's flagship division. Within hours, every major news network was running segments about the most famous father-daughter story in American business. Jonathan's response came through a carefully orchestrated media campaign that demonstrated he had learned nothing about his daughter's strategic capabilities during their 14 years of separation. He appeared on Good Morning America, with the kind of polished presentation that expensive public relations firms crafted for clients facing reputation crises. I made the difficult decision to stay away from Simone and Zuri because I believed they would be stronger without my interference, he explained to sympathetic hosts. Everything they've accomplished because I gave them the space to develop their own identities and capabilities. I've always been proud of my daughter's achievements, he continued. Now that she's established herself as a successful entrepreneur, I hope we can begin building the father-daughter relationship that circumstances prevented us from developing earlier. Zuri's response came 12 hours later, during a live television interview that would be studied in journalism schools as an example of how superior preparation could destroy even the most carefully constructed lies. She had agreed to appear on 60 Minutes with Sandra Williams, the same reporter who had attempted to portray her as an exploited child genius 3 years earlier. "Zuri," Williams began, "your biological father says he stayed away to give you space to develop independently. What's your response to that explanation?" 14-year-old Zuri looked directly into the camera with the controlled fury of someone who had spent years preparing for this moment. "Ms. Williams, I have copies of every legal document filed in my parents' divorce proceedings. Jonathan Hayes didn't stay away to give us space. He fought to eliminate his financial obligations to us. He filed fraudulent insurance claims to stick my mother with medical bills. He attempted to seize custody of me only after learning I was profitable. He has tried to acquire my technology through shell companies for the past 2 years. She reached into a briefcase and pulled out a folder, thick with documents that made Williams's eyes widen with journalistic excitement. These are emails between Hayes Construction and Hayes Technology Solutions, outlining strategies to gain access to my patents through business relationships. These are recordings of conversations where my biological father discussed acquiring my company without revealing his identity. These are financial records showing that every attempt he has made to contact me has been motivated by business interests, not parental love. The interview that followed lasted 43 minutes and systematically demolished every aspect of Jonathan's carefully constructed rehabilitation narrative. Zuri presented evidence of his abandonment, his legal attacks, his business espionage, and his current attempts to exploit their biological connection for financial gain. But the moment that would be replayed on news programs for months came when Williams asked about forgiveness. "Despite everything he's done, is there any part of you that wants a relationship with your father?" Zuri's expression softened slightly, and for a moment she looked like the 14-year-old child she was beneath her executive authority. "Ms. Williams, I learned about fathers by watching my mother work 18-hour days to build us a kingdom. I learned about loyalty by seeing her sacrifice everything to give me opportunities. I learned about love by growing up with someone who fought the world to protect my dreams." She paused, gathering herself for the words that would define their relationship forever. "Jonathan Hayes contributed DNA to my existence. That doesn't make him my father. That makes him a sperm donor who abandoned his responsibility and is now demanding credit for the empire we built without him." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with support for Zuri's position. Business magazines published analysis pieces about the financial success of single-mother families. Harvard Law School invited Zuri to speak about family, law, and parental responsibility. But the attention also brought dangers that forced both mother and daughter to confront the reality that success made them targets. The death threats began within hours of the 60 Minutes broadcast. Anonymous messages filled with racial slurs and violent fantasies flooded their business email, personal social media, and office voicemail systems. FBI agent Jennifer Foster arrived at their apartment the next morning with a security assessment that made Simone's parental instincts scream danger. "Mrs. Rivers, we've identified credible threats against both you and your daughter. from individuals connected to white supremacist organizations who view your success as a challenge to their worldview. That evening, Simone found herself contemplating something she had never imagined, running from a fight. "We could move to London," she told Zuri over dinner in their apartment, which was now surrounded by federal agents. "Your technology patents are international. We could build Zuritech's European division from scratch and leave all this hatred behind." Zuri set down her fork and looked at her mother with an expression that combined disappointment with absolute resolve. "Mama, you taught me that queens don't run from battles. You showed me that strength comes from facing people who want to destroy you and proving that their hatred makes you stronger, not weaker." "This is different, beautiful queen. These people want to hurt you because of who you are, not what you've accomplished. Then they've already lost," Zuri said, with the quiet confidence of someone who had inherited her mother's strategic mind and magnified it with her own mathematical precision. "We don't run from cowards, Mama. We make them irrelevant." 6 weeks later, Zuri Rivers became the youngest person in American history to testify before a congressional hearing on diversity and innovation in the technology industry. Standing behind the witness table in the House of Representatives, addressing congressmen and media representatives from around the world, she delivered testimony that would be quoted in business schools and civil rights organizations for decades. "Representatives," she began, her 14-year-old voice carrying across the chamber with absolute authority. "America's technology leadership depends on harvesting intelligence from every community, every background, and every kind of mind. When we exclude people because of what they look like rather than what they can contribute, we handicap ourselves in global competition." The standing ovation lasted 7 minutes. 3 months later, Time magazine featured Zuri on their cover as Person of the Year, the teenager reshaping America's future. Jonathan Hayes watched his daughter testify to Congress and realized he wasn't just losing a custody battle, he was losing the war for his own legacy. Chapter 10. The Empire's Hunt. The greatest victory is not destroying your enemy, but building something so magnificent that their hatred becomes irrelevant. The October morning that would reshape American business dawned crystal clear over Chicago, as if the universe had polished the sky for the final battle between empires built on opposite foundations. In the penthouse conference room of the Federal Building, 3 presentations lay waiting for the government officials who would award the largest artificial intelligence contract in United States history. $2 billion. Winner takes all. Simone Rivers, now 42, and commanding a consulting empire that employed over 800 people across 12 countries, sat at one end of the mahogany table, reviewing her proposal with the calm focus of someone who had spent 20 years preparing for this moment. Rivers Consulting had evolved from kitchen table dreams into the most innovative business strategy firm in North America, known for solutions that competitors called impossible until they watched them succeed. Beside her, 19-year-old Zuri Rivers radiated the controlled power of someone who had graduated from Harvard at 17 and built Zuritech into a company valued at $500 million. Her accessibility innovations now powered technology used by over 100 million people worldwide, making her the youngest billionaire in American history and the most influential voice in ethical artificial intelligence development. At the opposite end of the table sat Jonathan Hayes, 54 years old, and desperately trying to salvage a construction empire that was hemorrhaging clients, talent, and reputation. Hayes' Construction's proposal for the AI contract represented his last chance to compete with the family he had abandoned 20 years ago. The symmetry was perfect and devastating. Ladies and gentlemen, announced Secretary of Technology Amanda Foster, will begin with Hayes Construction's presentation of their artificial intelligence implementation strategy. Jonathan stood with practiced confidence, but his hands trembled as he activated his presentation. The years had not been kind to the man who had once walked away from everything that mattered. The Hayes AI platform represents traditional American values applied to cutting-edge technology. Our approach prioritizes established security protocols and time-tested implementation strategies. The presentation was competent, expensive, and utterly conventional. Jonathan proposed spending 18 months and $1.8 billion to create an AI system that would be outdated before it launched. When he finished, polite applause filled the silence like mourners at a funeral. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes," Secretary Foster said diplomatically. "Next, we'll hear from Zuri Tech Solutions." Zuri stood with fluid grace, her presentation remote, steady in hands that had never doubted their right to command attention from the most powerful people in America. Zuri Tech's proposal doesn't just implement artificial intelligence, it revolutionizes how AI serves human potential. The next 30 minutes unfolded like a masterclass in visionary technology development. Zuri presented an AI system that would cost $1.2 billion, launch in 10 months, and deliver capabilities that made existing government technology look like typewriters in a smartphone world. Traditional AI systems work for traditional users, she explained, demonstrating interfaces that adapted to different cognitive abilities, physical limitations, and learning styles. Our platform works for everyone, which means it works better for anyone. The government officials asked technical questions that would have stumped MIT professors. Zuri answered each one with the casual precision of someone explaining basic mathematics to elementary school students. When her presentation ended, the applause carried the energy of people who had just witnessed something extraordinary. Finally, Secretary Foster announced, Rivers Consulting will present their strategic implementation analysis. Simone stood with the authority of someone who had spent 20 years proving that excellence knew no boundaries. Her proposal wasn't just about artificial intelligence, it was about transforming how America approached innovation, diversity, and strategic thinking. The question isn't whether America can build superior artificial intelligence, she began. The question is whether we're smart enough to harness intelligence from every community, every background, and every kind of mind. But the moment that would be remembered came when she addressed the elephant in the room. Some of you might wonder whether personal history affects professional judgment. I can assure you that the best strategy comes from evaluating results, not relationships. Rivers Consulting recommends Zuri Tech Solutions because they offer the most innovative, cost-effective, and ethically sound approach to artificial intelligence development. Jonathan's face flushed with recognition of what had just happened. His ex-wife had not only outmaneuvered him strategically, she had demonstrated that her judgment transcended personal vendetta. The voting was unanimous. Zuri Tech Solutions won the contract, with Rivers Consulting selected as the primary implementation partner. As government officials filed out discussing timelines and security clearances, Jonathan lingered near the conference table, studying the family he had abandoned with expressions of loss so profound it felt like watching someone realize they had thrown away winning lottery tickets. "Simone," he said quietly, "could we talk?" "Privately?" "We are talking," she replied, packing her materials while Zuri collected congratulations from officials. "What did you want to say?" "I made mistakes. I was young, I was pressured, I wasn't ready for responsibility. But seeing what you've built, what she's accomplished, maybe we could find some way to—" "No," Zuri said firmly, her 19-year-old voice carrying the finality of someone who had spent years preparing for this conversation. She walked to Jonathan with confident strides that echoed her mother's refusal to be diminished by anyone's limitations. "Mr. Hayes," she said with professional courtesy that made his name sound like a business transaction, "you had 20 years to contact me. 20 years to express interest in my life, my education, or my well-being. Instead, you spent those years trying to exploit my success for your benefit." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder that made Jonathan's face turn ashen. "These are copies of the tax evasion documents my mother photographed in 2004. I've had them since I was 12 years old, waiting for the right moment to decide whether you deserved the opportunity to change." Jonathan stared at the evidence of crimes that could send him to federal prison, his mouth opening and closing without sound. His legal team had prepared him for business negotiations, reputation management, even hostile media coverage. They had not prepared him for his teenage daughter to produce evidence of federal crimes with the calm precision of a prosecuting attorney. "You kept those for 7 years, he whispered. 7 years, 4 months, and 16 days, Zuri corrected with mathematical precision. "I've been studying your business practices, your legal vulnerabilities, and your financial weaknesses since I learned to read corporate filings. Not for revenge. Revenge is inefficient. For insurance." She handed him the folder, but retained copies for herself, with the foresight of someone who understood that evidence shared was evidence potentially destroyed. "I'm not giving these to the IRS," she continued calmly, "because revenge is a waste of energy that could be spent building better things. But I want you to understand something clearly. You don't get credit for the empire we built without you. You don't get to claim connection to success you tried to sabotage. You don't get forgiveness from people you never asked permission to hurt." She paused, studying his face with clinical detachment, memorizing this moment when 20 years of abandonment reached its mathematical conclusion. Keep those as a reminder of who you chose to be versus who you could have been. And remember this: every success I achieve from this day forward, every innovation that changes the world, every life my technology improves, all of it will be accomplished by someone whose father thought she wasn't worth staying for. As they left the federal building, walking toward the car that would take them back to empires they had built from abandonment and armor, Simone felt the weight of complete victory settling around her like a crown. "How does it feel, beautiful queen?" she asked her daughter. "Like the beginning," Zuri replied, her eyes already focused on problems that needed solving and empires that needed building. "We've proven that excellence transcends prejudice, that intelligence overcomes abandonment, and that two women with nothing can build everything." Behind them, Jonathan Hayes stood alone in the federal building lobby, holding evidence of his crimes and confronting the reality that some opportunities, once rejected, never returned. The evening news would report that Zuritech had won the largest government technology contract in history. But the real story was simpler and more profound. 20 years after Jonathan Hayes abandoned his pregnant wife to chase shallow dreams of success, she and their daughter stood at the pinnacle of empires he could never have imagined. 20 years after Jonathan Hayes abandoned his pregnant wife, he watched from bankruptcy court as she and their daughter stood atop the empire he could have shared, but was too small to build.